Greetings, everyone, and welcome to today's MHA Alumni Webinar, Planning for the Unexpected, Disaster Response Webinar. I'm Heidi Mastrud, Director of Alumni Relations at the School of Public Health. Thanks to all alumni, students, and friends of the MHA program who've made time to join us live today. Today's webinar is hosted by the MHA Alumni Association and was planned by its Education and Engagement Committee. We're excited to offer this webinar to encourage and provide lifelong learning to both local and distance alumni, and we plan to offer more webinars in the future as part of an ongoing series. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. If you joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system and you'd prefer to listen over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio panel of your GoToWebinar panel, and dial-in information will be displayed. If you experience audio difficulties while listening via your computer speakers, this can be caused by having multiple software applications open. So I'd encourage you to shut down a few of the background programs and or dial in via the telephone. Questions are welcome and you can submit them at any time. Please type in your questions in the questions panel on the right-hand side of your screen under Q&A. I'll be monitoring those questions along the way, so submit your questions or comments at any time and we'll get to them when it's right for the presentation. And now for our webinar on disaster response. Our presenters today are Dave Lawson and Joe White. Dave is a 2012 Master of Healthcare Administration graduate and is currently the Associate Administrator for Summerlin Hospital in Las Vegas. Joe White graduated in 2017 with his MHA degree and is currently Associate Administrator for MountainView Hospital, also in the Las Vegas area. Welcome, Dave and Joe. Let's start out by having you introduce yourselves, and then I'll turn the webinar over to you. Dave, would you mind starting?
Actually, I think we'll start off with Joe, and then I'll start with the next.
Joe, why don't you start?
Oh, no problem. Hey, good morning or afternoon, wherever you're at, everybody. My name is Joe White. A little bit about myself, actually. I was born and raised in Las Vegas, born at Sunrise Hospital, and I'll be talking mostly about Sunrise today. I was born there, and my wife was born there. So I'm a huge Vegas fan. Obviously, we're going to the Stanley Cup, which is amazing for our inaugural hockey year. So I hope everybody on this call is rooting for the Knights. But I am an associate administrator here at MountainView. I've worked in the Las Vegas market probably for about the last 5 years. Sunrise Health System is part of a large for-profit healthcare system called HCA. We have 3 hospitals here in the Valley, and Dave will kind of go over the lay of the land. Prior to being here at Mountain View, I worked at our sister facility, Southern Hills, but again, always have been in the Las Vegas market. I was rather new, obviously, coming out of graduation into this role, and I responded to the event the night after I reported to the Public Information Officer. So you'll hear all the details of what happened, but actually the administrator on call that night for our facility was our CEO, who's also an alum of the program, class of 2002, Jeremy Bradshaw. So we kind of worked together to pull together some of these slides and best practices, and look forward to sharing some information with you. With that, I'll turn it over to Dave.
Hey, thanks, Joe. So my name is Dave Lawson. I'm based out of Colorado, not out of Vegas, but I now am in Vegas. I love Vegas. I've grown to love it quite a bit. I've been here for about 2 years as an associate administrator with UHS and at Summerlin Hospital, specifically here. My responsibilities here as an AA is I oversee the plant operations, lab, outpatient pharmacy, biomed engineering, EVS, and security. The night of the incident, I was the AOC, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the future as well. I also oversee construction projects and manage our capital budget plan here for the hospital, and among many other things. I think the AA title just means you put on a hat. That just means you're going to solve all problems that are thrown at you at all times. So that's kind of what AAs do. Before coming out here to the Vegas market, I actually worked for St. Luke's. And at St. Luke's in Houston, I was the Director of Physician Relations and Medical Affairs, and also the Interim Director of Business Development with Baylor St. Luke's. When I went there, I actually went there as a fellow for St. Luke's Episcopal Health System, and at the end of the fellowship, we were acquired by Catholic Health Initiatives, and it was at that acquisition that's when I became the Director of Physician Relations and Medical Affairs, and then also helped with the onboarding of our joint venture with our Baylor College of Medicine. So I helped with the joint venture there with the doctors and bringing a lot of the doctors over from Baylor College of Medicine over to the hospital. So that was a great experience there, which led to this good experience that I'm getting here. So we'll start off the presentation by going a little bit into the next slide. The next slide will give you a little healthcare landscape of Las Vegas. And as you can see, based on this map, there are hospitals kind of scattered throughout Vegas. And it's a market that's predominantly driven by the for-profit healthcare sector. But before we get into that, so Vegas has about 2.25 million residents. This number kind of stretches. It's kind of hard to really wrap your head around how many people truly are here, because it just keeps on growing and growing and growing, and you read one statistic that'll say this and then one that'll say another, but roughly about 2.25 million residents. Last year was the first year in about 10 years that our visitors dropped a little bit to the Vegas area and to the Strip. So we had about 39 million visitors last year, averaging, if you average that out, it's about 107,000 visitors each day. And again, you can look at different websites, different statistics that will tell you different things, but it's roughly anywhere. People will tell you we have about 100 to 250,000 visitors in Vegas at any given moment. So looking back about 30 years ago, Vegas had about 20 million visitors each year. So we've actually doubled the number of visitors in about 30 years here in Vegas. So Vegas, when you take into consideration everything going on in the Vegas market, from a healthcare perspective, we're growing like crazy, and then also the number of visitors, for the most part, is growing and growing every year, except for last year, which is likely due to the October 1st event. As you look here, as you see the Centennial, you can look at the different hospitals. If you look in the northwest area of Vegas, you see that Centennial Hills Hospital is one of our hospitals, one of my hospitals, Valley Health System. It's all the way out there, had very little to do with everything going on. You can kind of see the periphery around the Las Vegas Strip and all the different things going on there. There's a lot of different components to take into consideration when you've taken the events of October 1st. You can see there on the graphic on the right, you see the Mandalay Bay. There's a gunman on the 32nd floor. He shot about 10 minutes worth of a shooting in the crowd about 400 yards away during the Country Music Festival. We had about 22,000 people attending, visitors, and also many local residents and many employees of our hospitals were there as well. And so we'll go from this, and then Joe will talk a little bit more now about the specifics of that night. Joe?
Sorry, I was on mute. I muted myself. All right, so let's talk a little bit about October 1st, the event. So it was the largest mass shooting in modern U.S. history. All right, there were 22 guns that were found in the shooter's room, and over 900 rounds were fired during this event. It was reported that over 1,800 people were injured, over 500 wounded. There's 639 documented patient visits related to this incident. So there's much more, a lot of John Does and Jane Does that showed up to the emergency department and may have left without being, fully registered into the ED. As you can tell, I mean, our census increased significantly during that time, so getting all the patient information was difficult, but we do have about 640 documented patients. 58 people were killed, 31 were dead at the scene, and of those who arrived to a hospital alive, 14 died. There were a number of other patients that were deceased upon arrival. So as you can tell, this was just a massive event. I think, when you hear us talking about October 1st, you think, wow, okay, 58 people died, that's big, right? Orlando nightclub had 49, Texas Tech was 33, so yes, 58 is huge. But the bigger number that is really profound is the 500 that were wounded, and we're talking about gunshot wounds arriving to your emergency department, right? So in Orlando nightclub, there were 58 that were wounded, Virginia Tech 17 that were wounded. So we're dealing with, a large influx of patients into our ER, and that's why this was a really, really, profound event for all of Las Vegas, because There were so many circumstances that are just really hard to prepare for. One of the biggest ones being is that most patients arrived by a personal vehicle, right? When the event happened, they were loading patients, 5-10 patients in the back of pickup trucks and driving them as close as they could to the nearest hospital, wherever they could find. And so they weren't being routed by the ambulance, right? They were being routed by their phones, and they were hopping in Ubers and different things like that. And then when we talk about trauma, right? Trauma in Las Vegas is a touchy subject, right? It's very, very political, I'm sure, as it is in most markets. But there's only one level 1 trauma center here, which is UMC, our public hospital. Sunrise is a level 2 trauma center. And then level 3, there's one out in Henderson, Dignity. But other than that, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, I don't believe anybody else has trauma, right? So patients weren't necessarily they were just going to the nearest hospital. They didn't care who was trauma certified. And you'll see that with Valley Health System, the influx of patients that they saw. Patients were just looking to get to the nearest hospital as quickly as they could. So I hope throughout this presentation you're able to glean some information, education regarding the 4 phases of emergency preparedness. So the first being mitigation, right? Hospitals play a role in the mitigation, but not a huge role, right? We couldn't completely control for the event that was going to happen that night, right? We rely a lot on the casinos with their security, their response, the police department, as well as the fire department. Preparedness, the second phase, is where hospitals really kind of start to come into play, and then, of course, with response and recovery. So when we talk about the 4 different phases, those number 2 and 3, preparedness and response, is where we really need to shine as hospital systems, right? And we need to be prepared to be able to help these patients. So with that, I will turn it over to Dave.
And Joe, before we move on, there's a question on this last slide. What is the difference between injured and wounded?
So because there were 22,000 people that attended the event, there were many people that were trampled, as well as people when they were hopping over fences or different things, broken bones, fractures, head trauma. The wounded would be people with gunshot wounds that were hit by the 900 rounds that were fired. But yeah, the injured, there's a varying number that you can kind of find on the injured, but as you can imagine, many scrapes and bruises. One thing that's really interesting when we talk about a mass event like this, if you look back on that map, Mandalay Bay is right next to the Las Vegas airport. There were people jumping over the fences onto the runways at the airport. They had to shut down the airport, right? So these are huge fences, 10 feet tall. People are in adrenaline rushes that are jumping over fences, getting scraped or breaking an ankle, but they're just trying to get out as quickly as they can.
Thank you.
Yep.
So as you can see by looking at this map, it's an interesting market here in Vegas where normally you think of the Strip and there's normally 2 or 3 hospitals that kind of jump out at you as these are the hospitals that people are going to go to. It's interesting because you look at this map and you would say, well, Spring Valley Hospital is clearly right there by the Strip, and you would think that's only 3.9 miles away. That would get a lot of patients from the hospital or from the Strip in general. But in the Vegas market and the healthcare side of it, and from an administrative side, we don't really tend to think of Spring Valley Hospital being the hospital on the Strip. We think of Sunrise Hospital, Desert Springs, Valley Hospital, UMC. But in reality, Spring Valley was the closest hospital to the Mandalay Bay and really was the quickest route for people to get to. Also due to all of the roads being closed and it was just so hectic and chaotic that night, it really was the easiest route for people to take. Unfortunately, in the event of chaos and everyone's looking at their phones and trying to review, they're just saying, hey Siri, take me to the closest hospital, or Google, take me to the closest hospital. And the people would start driving down one road and it'd be closed, and so people started getting confused. Where am I supposed to go? Which direction am I supposed to go? And from an administrative standpoint, you think, well, obviously people are going to go to Sunrise. You think people are going to go to Desert Springs. But primarily you think UMC and Sunrise are the 2 main hospitals that people would go to. But again, if you look on this chart here, you see that it wasn't just UMC or Sunrise. Sunrise definitely got the bulk of it with 212 patients, and UMC with 104. But our hospitals with the Valley Health System, we also received a great number of patients. We were 53 at Spring Valley, Desert Springs 93, and 30 with Valley. It was interesting to see that turnout because on the night of at that event, we were looking at everything and trying to look through our computer system and see how many patients were going everywhere, because you would be watching the news and you'd see, well, there's X amount of people dead now, and this is how many are estimated to be wounded. And really we're trying to wrap our heads around and saying, well, how many are truly wounded? How many are dead? Where's the influx going to be? And that's where we're going to talk about kind of what happened from here, and what the lessons were from each of our health systems and what we could have done better, what we did well, what the response rate was, and what we really could have done to prepare better or do differently. If you want to jump to the next slide.
So this is where I'll start to take over. So Vegas Strong is kind of the the tagline that came from this event, right? That really brought the city together. And I guess I'll kind of start out by saying this could happen anywhere. I mean, we saw last week the Santa Fe, Texas shooting at a high school, right? We've seen in Florida. And whether it's a mass casualty event like this, or maybe it's something like a hurricane, right? Talk about Katrina. People look at Katrina, when they talk about the history, Louisiana, they talk about pre-Katrina and post-Katrina, right? It's kind of two different phases. Well, that's kind of how it's become with the October 1st event, right? Pre-Vegas Strong, pre-October 1, or post, right? What kind of happened and how it really brought the community together, the response that was incredible, and some of the best practices that were learned and some of the opportunities. And Dave and I are going to do our best to share all those opportunities with you all and kind of hope to inspire some more emergency preparedness action planning happening in your facilities, because I personally feel, having experienced this firsthand now, that this is going to continue down this path as we continue to have more people with mental health issues, access to firearms, or as we continue to have different disasters happening like Katrina or different hurricanes or earthquakes. It's our responsibility as health systems to make sure that we're prepared for these huge events. So with that, we'll go to the next slide and I'll talk a little bit about the Sunrise Health System and our response. So like I said, Sunrise is a level 2 trauma center, the only one in Las Vegas. They received 212 patients, so the most patients out of the entire population went to Sunrise. 150 patients arrived within 40 minutes. So imagine standing outside your ER and 140 people coming in, and again, you're not sure the number that are going to come in. You're hearing that there's an event down on the Strip, and you're kind of getting everybody ready, and then all of a sudden 150 people arrive within 40 minutes. Like I said, most arrived by personal vehicle. ER census was up to 228 at one point, right? So it is actually the busiest ER in our entire company at Sunrise. And then on top of that, it was up to 228 people, and I believe it's about a 60-bed hospital. There were 124 gunshot wounds, and 58 surgeries were done within 24 hours of the event. So every single operating room was open. And how we were able to do that, I'll talk a little later about that. 10 patients were deceased upon arrival or dead on arrival. We did have our triage station, someone outside who started with a physician, then I believe transitioned to a nurse who was doing the black, red, yellow, green tags, kind of, stratifying patients that way, and those who were unsalvageable and those who we needed to get back to the OR as quickly as possible. 6 patients did pass away at the hospital. I think it was somewhere around 64 patients were admitted to the hospital. MountainView, so the hospital where I'm currently located, we didn't receive as much of the volume due to our distance. We had 8 patients that arrived. However, we were able to respond with, we have a surgical residency here, so 22 of our surgical residents responded to the event and played a key critical role. As you can tell, if you're going to need to open 58 OR rooms within 24 hours, you're going to need as much help, as many hands on deck as possible. And we had our surgical residents who responded, some who were there, and then some who responded to the event and got, their texts and went out there. And we were also able to aid with supplies, right? We sent over supplies as quickly as we could, IV poles, whatever it may be, medications. And then our other sister hospital, Southern Hills Hospital, who's smaller hospital, about 150-bed hospital, they received 12 patients and they were able to aid with supplies. So all in all at the event, there was over 100 physicians for Sunrise Health System, and advanced practitioners who responded, and over 200 nurses. And I'll talk about that response a little bit in the next slide. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Joe, one of our participants is asking, what are the black, red, yellow, and green tags that you talked about?
So black, red, yellow, green is a way to stratify patients in emergency triage situation. Black would mean unsalvageable. Those would be the patients who were deceased upon arrival. Red would be the ones who need to get to the OR immediately, multiple gunshot wounds, severe trauma. These are the most critical patients. Your yellow are the ones who, yes, definitely need some help, but at some point they can hold off until the red patients get taken care of. And then the green are minor injuries, and even, it's not actual minor injuries. We're not talking like a level 4 or 5 triage. We're talking about these are people who have injuries, but they're not life-threatening at the moment, so we can get to them in a few hours. So it's just a way for the ED to identify which patients are in critical need. Thanks. Good questions. I enjoy it. Keep them coming. Okay, next slide. So lessons learned. So the incident command system, the biggest thing for me is be prepared, right? I was AOC the following week after the event, and it was actually going to be my first time being AOC. And I was obviously shell-shocked by this whole event because what would have happened had I been the AOC that night, right? My first time as AOC, and we have this event that happens. So I, made sure that I've done all the FEMA courses and all the training, but I'm not sure if any of you have done that, but they are the most boring things in the world. I cannot stay awake. I fell asleep probably 12 times while taking those courses. And so I call these things my Shark Tank ideas, right? I have what I call Shark Tank ideas, and one of them would be like a training, like a FEMA training, but integrating modern technology to be able to assist in these circumstances. So HCA actually has one. It's called Code Ready. It's what we use. And we launched it actually last week because we had another incident downtown on the Strip where a person walked into a mall with a firearm and a mask, but luckily nobody was injured and the firearm was fake. However, we did open up our Code Ready, and it's our way of communicating between different sister facilities, facilitates communication, lets you know what needs to be done, who to assign, right? You've got your incident commander, but then you have all those other different officers and your different chiefs that you need to assign, financial planning, operations, and then knowing what their responsibilities are, right? In events like this, you could be assigned to become the operations officer just because you're the only administrator there, right? Everybody else is out of town or something, and you show up first, and then you become the operations officer. Okay, well, what's your duties, right? So I think that there's opportunity to integrate modern technology to assign people, right? Responsibility operations officer kind of has okay, you arrive at the event, you read what's your job, and then you start communicating as such, right? You're the doer, you implement, you plan, you direct tactics, just so that everybody is aware of what their responsibilities are, because again, incident command is a universal way of planning for emergency preparedness or emergency situations like this. However, not everybody knows every single, officer or chief and what is needed. So making sure that we're prepared. Also hosting events, right? Making sure that we have drills at the hospital. We had a drill a week after the event, and it's been taken very seriously ever since October 1st. I think sometimes we think, oh, these drills, they interrupt patient flow, or they get patients or staff scared or nervous, and people just don't really take it seriously. I can tell you from here on out, I guarantee in Vegas, we're going to be taking every drill very, very seriously because we know that it could happen, right? So I think making sure that you create that urgency among your staff is key. Knowing your role, I kind of talked about that. You have to know what's your responsibilities. If you're the incident commander or if you're a liaison, you have to know what your responsibilities are. Practicing, again, I talked about that. And then I thought this was interesting. So we had the trauma surgeons and the emergency physicians who responded to the event come and give a lecture to our newly developed emergency medicine residency program. And they talked about the French system and how the French use on-site triage process. With the Valley Health System, they kind of, those patients were spread out as to who got the brunt of the patients. But for Sunrise, they got 212 patients, and you know, us in Southern Hills could definitely have taken some of those patients, probably some of the green tagged patients, to you know, decongest their emergency system a little bit. So I thought he said that the French are really good. This physician who responded said the French are very good at mass events like this, having on-site triage, or even if you're, you know, somebody who is at the front door of the ER at Sunrise, you know, with ambulances ready and saying, hey, take these 4 over to Mountain View. They're green tags, right? They can be treated over there. We don't want to, you know, fill up our ER with patients who can potentially wait. So I thought that was an interesting lesson learned that I think a lot of you all could benefit from.
Joe, could I interrupt with 2 questions? You
Yeah,
talked about being the AOC. Is that administrator on call?
Yeah, sorry. We use too much terminology here in healthcare. Yeah, AOC is administrator on call.
And then the second question, how often do you have drills now, and how often did you have them before the incident?
I would say, I believe we have a minimum of 2 drills a year. Before the incident, though, we were doing that. I would say we're probably closer to 4 now. I would say, but how the drills are conducted and the level is a little bit different, right? Because sometimes, you know, Joint Commission wants to see that you're performing drills, or you know, and you do want to be prepared, but sometimes you do it just to check a box, right? Just to say, okay, hey, we have to do this twice a year. Let's just get it done. We'll do a bomb threat or something like that. However, we don't take it with as much seriousness as we should, right? And now our events are much different, where we get volunteers who walk into the door, right? The last drill we had about 30 volunteers who walked into the door and just said, hey, this is a drill. Here's my patient information. I'm a patient who was shot, you know, 2 gunshot wounds. And then they started announcing it, and everybody started to get into place, right? So making sure that you actually have actual patients, not just, you know, like, oh, let's all pretend this. Like, no, we had actual people walking in saying, I'm this or I'm that. They even have makeup professional artists who do that stuff now to kind of make people look worse. We haven't done that yet, but we've definitely thought about it. So I think the type of drills, and I'm pretty sure that your local state comes out with what are your top, you know, risk areas. And one of ours was, our number 1 is earthquake, and number 2 is a mass casualty event like this. So let's not plan for a hurricane in Las Vegas, because it's just not going to happen, right? We're talking about mass incidents where people have a hard time getting to the hospital, roads are closed down, and communication is shut down. You'll hear a little bit about communication here too. So the drills are much more elaborate than they were before.
And one other question, and then we can move along. Are the drills done in collaboration with other hospitals? Yes.
So I would say we are very good at, for sure, collaborating with our sister facilities. I think that there's an opportunity now, and I've heard, that we are working with sister facilities to also do this, right? Valley Health System, who, we're not a part of, but at the same time, we need to be able to collaborate together in these type of circumstances. But generally, we always do include our sister facilities. So with that, I'll kind of breeze through these last 2 really quick. So communication during mass casualty events, it's huge, right? Dave will talk about how he was administrator on call, and the phone lines actually went down because of the number of phone calls that were happening during that event. And at Sunrise Health System, we had rolled out a few months earlier what's called iMobile. So these are iPhones for all the nurses and staff on the floor, and it's assigned to a station, right? So they don't leave the hospital, they stay there. But it operates on the Wi-Fi system, doesn't operate on the phone system. And this is a best practice, and the company touted this because, again, the phone line systems were down, communication was down. You couldn't communicate, with your sister facilities or even with your own staff calling down because of the phone line systems. But we had all Wi-Fi enabled phone systems, so we were able to communicate. And it did prove to be very helpful during that. Media response. So like I said, I responded to the public information officer, and I helped there, the day after. And it is incredible the amount of media that you get. And we had media sneaking in from every single door, going into patients' rooms and interviewing and trying to get shots of different things. It was honestly, I hated it. I have a disdain for the media now that I thought I didn't like the media that much, but after that event, they were just looking for the biggest story. They're just looking to boost up their numbers, get information, and it was, I learned a lot from our public information officer, but it was truly incredible to see all these different media outlets coming, parking on there, and just trying to rush into the facility. We had to organize security, and our communication had to be clear and concise with the media. And then lastly, this is a huge, huge lesson learned. So as you could tell, we talked about UMC being our level 1 trauma center. They only received 100 patients, and there's been some studies or some articles written about that. But one of the biggest problems is that they announced that they were on internal disaster overhead in their hospital. So internal disaster for them meant that all hands on deck, everybody get ready. However, in the community, internal disaster among the paramedics means that they're not able to handle any more patients. So our level 1 trauma center, it was communicated to the paramedics who were driving these patients that UMC is on internal disaster. Now, we don't know exactly where this came from or when or how it happened, but someone communicated that they were on internal disaster, which meant that the ambulance were going to reroute patients to other facilities, which is why you see Sunrise getting so many of them, because, our terminology wasn't mixed. So this is, UMC did a phenomenal job responding, and it is a great hospital, but this is definitely one of the biggest events. A recent article you can see I put on there, internal disaster alert on October 1st called Serious Mistake. There was a central problem with the internal disaster protocol as it is used in Clark County. It means different things for different audiences. So we have to have standard terminology or else we're going to have issues. And then the last thing that I'm going to say is Lady Luck, and this is what one of the physicians said, which is really funny. It's sad, but it's funny. He said this happened at a country concert where you had lots of retired military, you had a lot of people with belts, which sounds crazy, but the number of belts that were used to stop profuse bleeding was incredible, right? People coming in with belts around their legs or their arms. And the other thing that's Lady Luck, Las Vegas, happened at 10 p.m. on a Sunday night. Most people are kind of sitting at home, starting to get relaxed, maybe watching the news. That is how we were able to get over 100 physicians and advanced practice personnel and 200 nurses responding, because they saw that, they heard it, and they responded within minutes. Hundreds and hundreds of people there. We had a radiologist at the side of almost every physician, looking at scans, doing x-rays and saying, okay, here's where it's penetrated, here's where the bullet is, and then the surgeon's taking them back and operating on them, right? So having that response really mitigated the number of casualties that happened that night. And my biggest lesson that I'd like to share is that in moments of crisis, we expect medical personnel to be at the top of their game, and we should probably expect the same from hospital leadership. So medical personnel are in this world every day, treating patients, caring for patients. That's what they do every single day, surgeries, right? When they were called to respond, it was one of the most amazing things to watch these professionals respond to that situation. However, sometimes as administrators, we're not as prepared because we spend a lot of our day in business world, right? We spend a lot of it in patient care world, HCAPs, whatever it may be. So how much time do we actually spend in emergency preparedness? Yet, when those moments occur, we are expected to be just as prepared as our medical people are. So I would just suggest, make sure that you feel comfortable for these events, because people are going to look to you in those circumstances as to what to do, and we should be able to carry that torch. With that, if there's no other questions, I'll turn it over to Dave.
We do have a couple more questions. For those of you that are putting them in, I think what we'll do is hold some of these until the end to make sure that we can get through the content and then cover as many at the end of the presentation. So I see them, and hold tight. Hopefully we can get to them all.
All right. Thanks, Joe. I think Joe did a fantastic job there summarizing a lot of what happened. I'd have to say that likely the same lessons that he learned were the same lessons that we learned. They were the same sort of market, the same sort of hospital set up. We have the same lessons that we all learned. So I'll go through and talk through some of these. This slide's a little bit difficult to read. It got a little squished here, so bear with me on it as I try to take you through it. As you can see here, this is for the Valley Health System. Between Desert Springs Hospital, Spring Valley Hospital, Henderson Hospital, and Summerlin and Centennial, we had 216 patients that were brought in. Gunshot wounds, we had 128 gunshot wounds. lacerations, 21 probably from people climbing over fences, falling, you name it. There were so many different ways that people could have received the lacerations, the tramples, falls, deaths. We had 8 people that had showed up already expired, and so the total there again is a 216. As you can see, the treated and released, we had 148. We had 40 actual inpatient admissions and surgeries, and then we transferred, whether it's internal or external, most likely it was external, were the 14 patients there. And those 14 patients likely went to UMC or to Sunrise. And then observations, we only had 6 there, so it's, again, total is 216. A lot of the cases that happen, I'll start going down to the story when I was administrator on call that night. But before I jump into that, I guess, I'll talk a little bit about what happened last year around this time or a month or two before this. We had, at Summerlin Hospital, we had a code silver, which was an active shooter called out. We were in our safety huddle, of all things. We were in our safety huddle in the morning. We had a code silver that was called out. But when that was called out over the overhead page, there was no location in the hospital that it was called to. And so it just said code silver, and nobody knew anything, where it was, what happened, and it happened to be that I was administrator on call that day as well. And I ran out, or first poked my head out of the safety huddle room to look up and down the halls of the hospital to see where anything was, and the COO and we slowly started scanning through the hospital, and we were trying to make phone calls, but nobody knew anything other than code silver. We didn't know if it was in a patient room, if it was in the parking lot. We had no clue where it was. We didn't know if somebody had run into the OR, somebody ran into the ED. We had no idea where this code silver was. We started ushering patients as quickly as possible out of the hospital, but again, in our heads, we didn't know where the shooting was. Again, it just wasn't called properly. Next thing you know, I look out the door, and there's about, probably, without exaggerating, about 15 police cars quickly pulling up to the hospital. We ended up, about 5 to 10 minutes later, we realized this was likely a code silver that was not called correctly. It was a false alarm. But by the time we thought we had a false alarm, it had already been escalated to the point that we had the SWAT team out everywhere in front of our hospital. We had a helicopter that was already dispatched, and within 20 minutes we had a SWAT officer hanging out of a helicopter with his gun pointed on our hospital, circling our hospital. Beyond that, we had snipers sitting on the hills outside of just right outside of our parking lot in full camouflage pointing guns in our hospital. So at that point, it was a false code silver, but it's a little bit hard to contain that when it just escalated so quickly. So we took a lot of lessons learned from that. We had a lot of lessons learned. Well, communication, proper use of code silver, retrained staff on all of that. It scared a lot of people. It scared patients. It scared staff. It scared everybody. Even as AOC, you're trying to make sense of what's going on, and as you're kind of going through the hospital, you don't know if you're going to get shot. It probably wasn't the best thing to do, hindsight, but the COO and we did it, and that we felt that was still the right thing to do. So we learned a lot that night, or that day, from what we should and should not do. What ended up happening then is on October 1st, I was laying in bed about ready to fall asleep, and I got a call from our house supervisor. House supervisor said, "Hey, there's been a shooting off the strip. I don't know if you're aware of it." I had no idea. It was 10:30 maybe. I can't really remember exactly when the phone call was. I said, "No, I haven't looked. I'll turn on my TV." And then as we were watching the TV, she was at the hospital, and I was in my bed, and turned on the TV, and we're kind of talking through it, and the numbers seemed to grow a little bit bigger, and it seemed like there were maybe 9 people that were shot. Thought, okay, well, my hospital's all the way in the northwest or the western part of Vegas. Chances are it's not going to have any impact at all. I said, well, I'll keep in touch with you. I'll keep watching the news. About 20 minutes later, as the news stories continued to come out and videos, and you could hear the shooting go on in the videos, and I thought, this might be a little bit bigger. I picked up the phone, called the CEO, and we touched base a little bit, and he said, well, do we need to activate any command center? What do you want to do? We both felt that it wasn't time to activate any sort of incident command center because, again, we had no idea, and we figured it was only the hospitals downtown. We hadn't received any word from any of the hospitals downtown on what to do. We started texting each other, just keeping each other informed of any updates that we saw on the news. 5-10 minutes went by, 20 minutes went by, and then all of a sudden the house supervisor called me and said, I think probably you guys might want to come in. Just because the news at that point had shown a lot more was happening than we originally thought. So I tried reaching out to the CEO. He didn't pick up his cell phone. He didn't respond to any text messages. I thought, okay, this is strange. So I decided to show up to the hospital. I think I got into the hospital about 11:45. And when I walked into the hospital, I actually walked in right at the same time as the CEO, and he said, you didn't respond to any of my text messages. And I said, well, you didn't respond to any of my text messages. And we realized that we were texting each other, but none of our text messages were going through to each other. None of our calls that we were making to each other were actually going into back and forth to each other. So we realized at that point we had some sort of communication issue, but we didn't know what the communication was that we were supposed to send out to anybody on our teams yet, because we had yet to really assess the situation. When I walked into the hospital, walked right into the ED, and as soon as I walked into the emergency department, there was a patient being transported on a gurney right by me, and they were covered in blood, and you can tell they were a gunshot victim. And so they were being carted right to the operating room, and we thought, wow, this is going to be kind of crazy. It's going to be very hectic. But what ended up happening in my hospital is there was not a lot happening. As you can see, we only had 10 patients that came into our hospital. Those 10 patients, as they came in, it wasn't the most life-threatening. A couple of them were with gunshots, but it really wasn't the most life-threatening patients that we received. And within about another 30 minutes or 45 minutes, about everybody from our leadership team, everybody from our entire C-suite has shown up to the hospital, and then many of the nursing directors, leaders, have shown up to the hospital as well. At that point, we essentially had an incident command center that we had set up, but it wasn't truly formalized. And we didn't really have a lot of patients in our emergency department anyway, because we had really tried to clear them all out. And it was a kind of an eerie feeling, because you'd watch the news and see all of these patients all of these people in the community being carted off to the different hospitals, but our hospital was relatively quiet. Similar to probably what Joe experienced at his hospital, our hospital was pretty quiet. It was a very calm night. But if you'll go to the next slide here, we can start talking about some of the lessons learned of what happened. So one thing that did happen with the Valley Health System is all patients that arrived at the Valley Health System hospitals, each one of them were kept alive from the life-saving, great quality care that we had. Our physicians were amazing. All of our clinical staff, our nurses, you name it, top to bottom, everybody was amazing in each one of our hospitals. Next slide. So the biggest lesson learned is that everybody pitched in. People started showing up left and right. We had nurses showing up to our hospital, and I was sending I was sending the nurses over to other hospitals as we thought that they needed help. But again, because the communication was getting broken down, it was very hard to step back and see where we needed help. We had cell phones that weren't working. Then what we ended up happening is we had, on top of that limited cell phone connectivity, we had media coming in. We had media making phone calls to each one of the hospitals, acting like they were administrators from other hospitals, saying, hey, this is so-and-so from Spring Valley Hospital. We're just wanting to see how many people you have in your emergency department. And it ended up being that these were people from the media calling each other's, all the hospitals, just trying to get a body count. They were trying to see how many patients were in the hospitals, how many people were killed. The media was just calling all of the hospitals, acting like they were from the hospitals, from other sister hospitals, but in reality they were just calling and really blocking our phone lines because they were just trying to get the right numbers out there in the news, which made it hard then for us to then reach out to our sister facilities and say, do you need help? What do you really need? What ended up happening was I would just end up texting my counterparts or the other AOCs and say, this is what needs to be done here at this hospital. Do you have the resources for it? Do you have the right number of nurses? Do you need any additional techs? Do you need people in the OR? Do you need additional physicians? There were a lot of different things that were going on that just weren't correlated correctly and weren't really coordinated in the way that they should have been, only due to the fact that we had the media calling into the hospitals and kind of jamming our phone lines. So we had to really rely, once the text messaging services got up again and our cell phone towers got up again, then we were able to really communicate well. So with that limited cell phone connectivity, we ended up stepping back, and now the health system is buying some satellite communication technology for each one of the hospitals. So not just having bat phones, as we call them, or just having a satellite phone. It's a communication or a technology that's going to be placed on each one of our hospitals that will allow the hospital to continue functioning with full internet and full phone lines communications, but it'll all be through satellite. So there's going to be a device that we're going to attach to each one of our hospitals that essentially turns our entire hospital into a satellite communication hospital. In case our cell phone towers or anything like that get bogged down, we will be able to have direct access, to each other, but then to be able to continue using our electronic medical records and other things like that, just to continue the patient care. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do that. Another thing that we went over, we never knew what was too much to communicate and not enough to communicate. There were a lot of different times as the night went on when we said, do we need to be communicating more out to our staff? Looking back on it, we realized we should have been communicating more just because staff weren't fully aware of what the situation was in our hospital. And some of the other hospitals in town that were more centered around the event, they were communicating a little bit better, but we didn't know how much we should or should not communicate, and we decided afterwards that we should have communicated more, that we should have sent out more blast emails, some blast text messages to our staff to give them more of an update, maybe hour by hour of what was happening in the hospital. The other thing was, did we need to activate the Incident Command Center? Still looking back on this, we never formally activated the Incident Command Center. We decide now that if there's ever a case that we think that there could be a potential to activate the Incident Command Center, we're going to do it no matter what. There's no reason to not do it. If anything, it just provides great practice for the hospital. But in essence, it's the right thing to do every single time. Now, did things move forward fine without it in my specific hospital? Absolutely. Were patients taken care of? Absolutely. Staff showed up as needed. Managers were informed. It was more of an informal Incident Command Center, but we should have formalized it, and we could have done that better. So we made the decision for anything that, again, seemed like we should activate the Incident Command Center. Don't hesitate. Just go ahead and activate it right away. The resources that we looked at is, again, it's hard to identify what those needs are without a central person. So Valley Health System is working on and has found a center way of contacting with key people in the organization who will, from a centralized perspective, be able to communicate out the needs of all the different hospitals. Again, we didn't have that. Each hospital was kind of left on their own, and we were kind of text messaging back and forth. We didn't have a true universal way of doing it, but now we have that. Communication, we want it to be more open, more transparent, quicker, and have the designated people in each hospital know who the names are of the others in the hospitals and our sister facilities, so we can have that open communication without saying, are you part of the media? Are you just trying to find out more information, what's really going on here, or just not even responding? So now we have key designated people in each hospital to open that line of communication. And again, sharing the burden. We had, at one point, we ran into a problem where we needed some supplies from a central location, and we weren't able to get those supplies over quickly. Then we realized that the right people weren't on the phone, and then once we got the right people on the phone, we got the right people with the right keys to open the right doors and do the right things to be able to get it was some other equipment. I won't go into the details because of time, but we realized that there was better ways that we should have been communicating and really make sure that the right people have the right keys at the right time. And so now we have a better system set up in place so that way we can always share the resources as needed between each one of our hospitals. I think that about sums it up from our end. Again, I would just say the number one thing that I was the most amazed with that night was that everybody pitched in. There was not one person who stepped back and said, well, I'm just going to sit back and wait. Most people who were interested or who were awake came into the hospital. We had countless people just standing around waiting to help out in any way possible. And with those people, I ended up pointing them to the other hospitals, to Desert Springs, to Spring Valley, and to Valley Hospital. Said just go there. And then people were asking, well, how do I clock in, clock out? So don't even worry. Half the people didn't even care. I don't even know if we 100% paid for everybody because we don't know. We don't know if people clocked in or out. People didn't care. They truly just wanted to do the right thing and help out patients. And that's really, in a time of tragic events like this, people will stand up. The whole reason why we're here in healthcare is to do the right thing. I don't think anybody, even on the administrative side, is in healthcare for purely financial gains or anything like that. People are in healthcare to help out the community and to help out in any way they possibly can. So in these MCI, these mass casualty incidents, everybody will step up, and it's quite an amazing event to see unfold. Any questions? Any questions? Yeah. Joe, anything else you want to add into this?
Nope, good job.
All right.
We have a lot of questions that have come in. For our participants, please feel free to keep adding them. I will get to as many as possible. The first question, I think, is for you, Dave, but Joe, please add your 2 cents as well. Can you talk a little bit more about if you had a chance to follow up with the media about the negative impact their behavior had on your ability to communicate and deal with this incident?
I personally, that's a good question. I don't know if that had been done yet at this point. I know that we've reached out to some of the media sources, but again, it's hard to pinpoint where that was coming from, who it was coming from. We don't know. I mean, it could have even been people in the public just also calling, just asking because out of curiosity what was happening. We don't 100% know which media outlet it was. It's very hard to pinpoint. So I don't know if we've been able to communicate with the media in a good way on that. I don't know, Joe, if you guys have been able to do that at all. I can say I don't know.
As far as I'm aware, I'm not aware of any, right? I think the hardest part is kind of like Dave was saying, everybody's media in that moment, right? You've got bloggers, you've got Fox, you've got CNN, you've got anybody, and I didn't even know how many arms there were of CNN, but I had like 10 different CNN arms reaching out to me, right? So when I was in that room, so, you know, I'd be like, well, I just spoke to someone with CNN. They're like, oh, but they're with that. I'm a different part of CNN, right? So it's like, I don't even know, you know, I think it's a great idea, but I'm not sure where to start just because, like Dave said, we're not completely aware of who was reaching out or the credibility of these organizations that were reaching out to us.
Could either of you answer this question? The question is, did the local health department have any role in the emergency or afterwards? What was it or what should it have been?
I think the only thing that, you know, I'm sure that they did. I think we were all kind of, you know, we were caught up in our own little world for a little bit, and I think that everybody played a key part in this, right? Even the paramedics, the firemen, their response. From the local health department, you know, there was an amazing amount of blood that was donated within the next few days, right? A lot of education as to what was needed. You know, our ER was 24 hours after the event, we were back operating at normal. So, you know, even though it was a massive event, you know, a lot of it happened within 24 hours, right? We were running back at normal. We just, you know, treated these patients as inpatients. What we were dealing with a lot was the morning, right? So I think the health department has helped with the mental health issues that have come about, you know, the post-traumatic stress and whatnot, as well as blood, making sure that we have enough blood. But that's what I've seen. I'm not sure, Dave, you have anything to add?
No, I was just going to say a lot of it was the blood communication. I know it seemed like we had everybody in town was wanting to donate blood the next 24 or 48 hours, and of course there's only so much blood that is needed before it expires too, so there was a surplus of blood donations going on, so I think the turnout was amazing from the community, and so I think everybody in public health from the public health side was really trying to communicate that message. How much blood do we need? How should we try to acquire it? Where can you go? How can you donate? What are things to be able to do there? And that's really what they were involved with. Outside of that, quite honestly, I don't know what else they were involved with, but I'm sure there was a lot more that they were involved with.
Yeah, and I want to add on to Dave because, you know, everybody was really looking to help in these moments, right, the morning of. And there was food being delivered to the hospital for, you know, people who hadn't been able to go home. He had been operating all night. We had so much food. We had spa supplies come to the hospital. We just had a donation room where people were just driving up and donating things for the patients, for their family members. A majority of the people who passed away at this event were actually from California, out of state, right? Quite a few from Las Vegas, but again, making sure there was donations to help people fly in to see their family members, whatever it might be. There was collaboration across all organizations, I would say.
Fantastic. I think that you... Oh, go ahead, please.
So one thing that I thought was interesting was, I think public health, I think one of the things that could have been done better is just communicating in general to the public on the night of the shooting, where they should be going and how they could be directed. It's interesting, I meant to say this earlier, but in one of our sister facilities in Palmdale, California, they actually received a gunshot victim because they went to 2 different hospitals here in town, and they didn't know, they were turned away essentially because the line was too long. And so that patient, instead of trying to find another hospital, they figured every hospital in town was so bogged down, they drove all the way to California, I think 3 or 4, maybe 4.5 hours, I don't even know how far Palmdale is, but 3 or 4 hours away to one of our sister hospitals, which is so random that it happened to be one of our sister hospitals in our company, in our UHS company. But they showed up there in Palmdale with a gunshot wound. And it just goes to show that the communication was breaking down in the public. And I think the public health officials tried to wrap their hands around it real quickly, but again, it was all happening so quickly and so fast that there was no way we could really control where people were taking patients and which hospitals they could choose. Sorry, I know that's kind of a random comment, but I wanted to mention that earlier.
Well, and there's a follow-up question in a similar vein, which is, how much contact did you have with hospitals outside of your network or your company before the event, and how much collaboration would you say you have now?
I would say before the event, again, we are a highly competitive market, and a lot of safety measures and everything that we work on, probably before the event, were not as unified as they should have been. I think post-event, everyone's open. And not that people weren't open before, but I think obviously an event like this brings the entire community together in a way that wasn't done before. And so now everyone's willing to share information. I mean, there are things that Joe's even said today that I thought, okay, after this call, I'm going to call up Joe and see if there are certain things I can get from him so we can try to implement something here in our hospital and our health system. So we're 100% on board, collaborating, communicating. I would say beforehand, in the year before that I was here, I felt that there was limited cooperation and coordination between the hospitals. I don't know if I'm speaking out of place, Joe. What are your thoughts?
No, I don't disagree with that at all. As to the event, I think it definitely helps in preparing for these type of emergencies, right? The preparedness, but the response of the event, we were all inundated at that moment, willing to help however we could. Most of the physicians are not employed by the hospitals here, right? So either way, we were sharing positions, right? And the nurses were responding. And I think, communication may have not been huge between the facilities, but we were all dealing with our own massive influxes, right? So I think in the preparedness, it will allow us, but I do not think that was too much of a crutch in the response. I don't think that the outcome would have been significantly better, just because I think it would have likely been the same, right? Everybody trying to deal with what's going on in their world, right? You've got your paradigm that you can control, and anything outside of that, it kind of makes it difficult, right?
Yeah. Well, Dave and Joe, I am so grateful to you for sharing your experience and expertise with this group. Thanks to everybody who participated on today's webinar. I encourage you to complete the survey that you'll receive in an email once the webinar ends, so we can know how this met your needs for ongoing professional development. Your responses will also help us identify future topics you'd like to hear about. So thank you to you all again, especially to Dave and Joe, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.